Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. This is a podcast with book coaches, editors, and besties who discuss books, but not as readers. We discuss them as writers to draw inspiration from great books with lots of laughs. And I cannot believe, but we are coming in strong with our 2026 reading selection. And so if you're joining us today, we'll be talking around the plot of Mistborn. I want to make sure we are very around it because
Yes.
It would be so easy to sort of slip down the rabbit hole, and we are not going to do that. However, this is going to be a very informative discussion because this is one of Rachel's jams. And I am just literally hanging on by the hair on my chinny chin chin. Okay? So I'm just gonna keep it a buck from the beginning. So with that said, before we get into our discussion on plot in Mistborn and all the juiciness that we're gonna find there, Rachel, what do you have going on over there at Story Cypher?
Yes, ma'am. Well, so you know that last year we spent the last half of the year running the cohort for the Academy for the first time. So our first ever run. It was the beta run, and so this year we are running our next cohort. Right, everything we learned with the beta run, we get to implement throughout the new year. So we do a cohort every 6 months. But also one of the things that I'm so excited about for 2026 is now that we've had a group of people go through the initial cohort. Now we get to move into, we're calling it the Fellows Program, which is when you graduate from the cohort, you're invited into sort of the next level of community where you start to develop more specific skill sets, right? Because first, we kind of need to understand, okay, how does a story work and how do we go through the process? Because so quickly we'll sort of derail on, I want to figure out how to do this particular skill, and we haven't even done a first draft and we don't even know what we're writing, right? So just trying not to get ahead of ourselves. So once you've been through that sort of foundation of understanding how to draft in iterative stages and how to separate out writer brain and editor brain and let each one function in its lane, we really get to go diving deep into specific skill sets and working on things like dialogue and exposition and fine-tuning our stories and really get into the good nitty-gritty stuff. And that's what we're going to get to do over the course of the next year. So while we're introducing new cohorts twice throughout this year, we also have our fellows who get to stay in community with each other as they're finishing books, writing their next books, and developing more skills and continuing to spend that time together. Because honestly, we did the beta run and the community was so wonderful. I was like, well, we can't just part ways after this, right? You go through something for 6 months and it's so special. And there's still so much more to learn and so many more books to write. You don't want to just be like, all right, well, see you never, right? You're just like, bye.
Deuces.
Right? And so I'm really excited for 2026 to spend more time with the fellows in our program and add new fellows to the program as the cohorts, finish their 6 months and also just improving on the experience of the Academy and making what we've already done even better, right? With each sort of iteration that we do it to make it that little bit better and that little bit better. So I'm excited about the Academy in 2026 and all of the work that we're going to do and all the ways it's going to be even better. And also we've got a lot of good books to read. We got books to finish and books to read, and it's just going to be, I'm just really looking forward to 2026. I think it's going to be a great year. I think 2025 was a lot of foundation building, and now 2026 we get to build on that foundation through the year, and that's always an exciting place to be because then you see things start to take shape. So that's what we got going on over here. Dana, what are you looking forward to for Danger Tales in 2026?
Well, I'm going to say, but I have a question.
Oh, hit me with a question.
How do you feel about it? just like you're talking about from the students and them graduating and all that, and it was foundational. And I'm just really curious about, I mean, I kind of know, but I just, my mic is hot. So like, how do you feel about now going into this second like phase of it and kind of going through that first cohort and that lightning round of writing and seeing where the students are, just sort of like high level, like how does it feel being you in this place and going into a new cohort in a new year?
Yeah. I feel wildly proud of the work that I did, especially the last 6 months. I mean, recording videos of writing my own project, and it's my first project that I've written from start to finish, like was and continues to be an insane undertaking. And I gave absolutely everything I had to that beta run, to develop the curriculum, to schedule it, and to work out the pacing so that it makes sense and it's enabling everyone to keep moving forward without anybody dying in the process, trying to like do everything all at once or do a crazy amount of, everybody did a crazy amount of work, but it stayed within the bounds of normal crazy, not like, oh, this is humanly impossible insane. Crazy, yes. So I'm really, really proud of all the work that we've done, and to see the transformation in the students, right? Like to have students who said, I have been working this project or not able to crack this project for 5 years, 10 years, and they show up and they go through the program and they have finished second drafts in hand and are working and have a plan for creating the third draft to kind of make for that final major iteration on their story after having been stuck for 5 to 10 years. That is like it's amazing for them, but then for me to have gotten to be a part of that and to have gotten to do something that enabled someone who'd been stuck for a long time to be able to actualize something that they care so deeply about and that they've carried with them for so long, knowing that this means they get to finish this book and write their next one too. That has I couldn't be happier. It's scary to open up new cohorts because you're like, okay, will people see? Because I know that it's such an awesome program and I've seen the results. Will other people also, sort of be able to see what the benefits are, and have I communicated that well enough in those things that are like, I hope the people like it. These people loved it, and I'm hoping that other people like it too. But I'm really proud of the work that I did, again, especially those last 6 months of building the program. So, and I'm excited to do it again. Like, I'm excited to give the lectures again, knowing what I know now and having developed the material through having iterated on it myself multiple times. Because I also, gave portions of it for Pro Writing Aid. And so it's, every time you do it, you learn more about how to do it better. And so I'm excited to do it again, and also not have to record videos of me running my project, because that almost killed me. So I'm really glad that it's like, that I'll be able to give the lectures again, but I don't have to be like, do a whole new project, because I was doing the math. And so the program is designed so that the students have 6 months, right? Because they get their lecture first off in the month, that first Wednesday, so they have the information, and then they have the rest of the month to work. And I always, at the end of each month, I give them a hey, if you finished early, here's a sneak preview of those first steps so you can get a head start on the next work before we get to the lecture. And so it's designed so they had maximum amount of time to work. For me, because I'm writing and teaching and having to record videos, I would say I averaged, if each student gets 4 weeks to work per month, I probably got 2 weeks to work on any individual part. So my first draft, I wrote in 2.5 weeks. My second draft, I wrote 90% of it in 1 week, which is really, really wild. So probably in total, my project got about 15 weeks worth of work out of the 6 months. So being able to slow down and let the process breathe a little bit, I'm looking forward to that aspect as well. So it's been kind of a mad experience, but in all good ways, and really just like at the end of it all, just wonderful and satisfying. And yeah, so it feels good. That was a really long-winded way of saying it feels pretty good.
I absolutely love it. Like we talked about this before. I think it's so interesting, especially because when you first started talking about this process, and I'm like, okay, are you ready? And asking the questions, and now to see you on the other side, I'm super proud of you too, and I'm excited for what's coming, and the more that you iterate and sort of. I think it's something very interesting to get to a point where you're in your bag, and it allows you to then even level up what you know to be true about what you do, because it's sort of like it's battle tested. And when you have students in there, you get to see it through their eyes, which helps you to get whether there's iterations or different ways that people can look at the same exercises. And it just makes you a better coach and editor. And then ultimately, I think a better writer, because you have to, like, this is where I feel like the more you have to learn how to articulate it so that everyone can get it, the more you're chewing on it.
Yeah.
And so then it gives you even more. So I'm excited for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
I feel like I'm on the same road, but different, but maybe exactly the same. You said something towards the end that sort of like, I think piggybacks on it, is this thought of slowing down so that you can sort of breathe, but also you're still going, right? And so for us, right now, by the time you all are listening to this, we're doing our one-on-ones in Inner Circle, which is so interesting because it's being totally informed by our closeout retreat. And it was so interesting that I was working on that retreat for so long. And then towards the end, of course, true Dana fashion, I was like, you know what? I want to strip this all the way down and say, like, what is the real problem? And so it happened towards the end, once the retreat was actually, like, we're in the middle of it. It was this question of, a lot of times we feel like we may fail in our plans that we make for ourselves. But the reality is that the plan was never set on a path of success because you didn't make that plan with your real life in mind.
Yeah.
You sort of was making that plan from this pie in the sky, like, ooh, like I've never been able to write every day, but this year I'm gonna write every single day.
This is the one. This
is the one. Not 1 hour. I'm gonna give it 5 hours.
Right. Yes.
And I was like, that. So when I thought about that, it was like I sort of did like this, a system of like, okay, where are you in your life? Are you maintaining? Are you scaling? Or are you like building your foundations? And then what is it that you then do your business plans? Like once you kind of go through these filters, if you will. And now when the people that are in Inner Circle, they come back around because we do one-on-ones. Now I get to see their responses against their plan.
Yeah, nice.
And so it's just, it is one of the, it's like, it's so true. And so for DTW, like we're continuing and we'll be doing like more doubling down, like double clicking on some of those core topics that every time you finish a book or every time you finish a series that you find yourself wanting to either get better at character development, better at plotting, better at your prep, better at your world building. And so, so I just find that for me, it's almost this thing of like maintaining, but allowing people to sort of grow in that space and figuring out how do I recalibrate so that particular person or this group really gets to see both having wins, but also like getting them closer to their ultimate goal. Because I'm always in a capacity of holding space for them. And so I'm seeing the person from where they started and where they still want to go and where they are right now as we move forward. And so between that and still figuring out the book selection for book club, I still need to finish it. I got the first quarter, but I'm like, so that's always fun. But
wait, can we talk about? Wait, are you gonna tell me about what this book is and what like? Because you're still trying to finish a book club selection, but you're like, ugh. And I want to know, but if you're like, I'm not about to go throw in shade or I'm not going to spoil it, then you can let it go.
No, it's not like that. It's, like I realized once I was working on the plans, because y'all know we record, like it's out of order a little bit. But so like at this time, like I'm doing all the stuff for first quarter. And I also have to do this with my life in mind. That's the part that gets me, like with my life and reading and writing in mind as well.
Yes.
So that's the thing that makes it like, and also because this is basically going into our third year of consecutive monthly book club meetings.
Wow. Yeah.
Exactly. So that has been so interesting. So it made it so that before, a lot of them were tried and true books that I would always recommend to clients, blah, blah, blah. Now, like I'm going to be mixing in some of those, but also keeping my eyes on the charts, reading other books to see where we can learn some different skills, and then still being able to point them back to our replays. And so it makes it so that we can have some very interesting questions because or conversations, because we had some that really did well with the participants that I didn't even plan to do. It was only because of my reading that I was like, oh my gosh, we've got to do this. Like I bumped one, So I like to have it in pencil so it's flexible. And so having those moments, I realized, okay, this is what we're doing now. These are the ones that are in pencil. I know I want to do this for this reason, and to be able to sit and watch the discussions. We still have people that are on different spectrums, so making sure we have some sweet, some steamy, some PNR, some fantasy. And so it just makes me kind of stay on my toes. I love it when there are months where they overlap with this, but it's not often. And I love it when there are months when it overlaps with what I'm reading. But for 2026, I've kind of decided I'm not going to overlap it with my own reading.
Yeah. So wait, so that means twice as many books?
Yes,
wait,
a little
why?
bit.
Tell me why did we make this
You know what?
particular decision? I'm noticing a pattern, and I'm like, no, hang on. I already know what your schedule looks like in 2026. What do we want to tell me more?
The reason why is because, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in another episode, but the big reason is because I know we're going to talk about this in another, so you guys will hear about it more, but it's because I'm doing deep dives. And I don't want my thoughts tainted. I just want it to be just my thoughts. And because I'm a person where, like, I'm a sponge. Now, I'm going to still, like, what I think is going to still be there. But because the first pass of my learning is usually in questions of like, well, why would they do this? And this, and that. No. So when I'm hearing other people's stuff, my mind is sort of having these open loops. And I don't want anything inserted into those open loops until I'm like, okay, this is what I think. This is what so, yeah. So that's why.
Gotcha. Okay. Woo. Yeah, I'm excited to talk more about your deep dives, because if I know one thing, it's that you're great at a deep dive.
Oh my God, girl, it's my jam. Listen, I could live in that, and it's fun. But the great thing is that it will be kind of like future pacing for future books or not.
Yeah.
Right. And then quite a few of them are ones that I've read many times, but this is going to be on a whole nother level. And just honestly, just giving myself the permission to be like, it is what it is. Again, that whole thing of like slowing down, of like pacing yourself, or the way that I've been categorizing it in my mind is like allowing yourself to be exactly where you are, and you'll get to that next phase when it's time. So, yeah. So with that said, y'all, I think you see that we are rocking and rolling into a whole new year, in how we have more books and more opportunities to engage with you and our writers. But as we jump into this discussion, we started off with a summary And so, Rachel, go ahead and hit us with this summary of Mistborn before we jump into our discussion around the plot.
Oh, I got you. All right, let's get into it. So, Vin is a Ska working on a thieving crew, just trying to survive. Just like every Ska, under the heavy hand of the Lord Ruler, God and Emperor over Luthadel. But when she gets recruited by Kelsier for a job, she discovers that her luck is way more than just luck. And Kelsier isn't just trying to rob the Lord Ruler, he's trying to kill him. This high-stakes job could change everything, for Vin and Ska everywhere, if Kelsier and his crew of specialists can overcome Steel Inquisitors, noble spies, and teach Vin how to be a Mistborn. And how to wear a dress. And scene.
Love it! And he gonna toss in her dress.
You can't... we talked about this in the previous episode, but this book, the number of times that I've read this book, I teach from this book, right? This is one of my primary teaching materials. And so when I sat down to write that summary, like, it's like all like locked and loaded in there, ready to go. And I was like, I know this. I was like limitlessing. I was like, I understand the story.
Y'all, listen. And as she say that, this is why I told her, listen, I'm shotgun. This woman has read this book so many times. There is no way, Jose. So I'm totally shotgun and sitting in the passenger seat. But with that said, I would love for you to talk about some of the things that you want us to discuss as we move forward. Y'all, she's going to ask me mine. I'm going to let you know right now. I will be piggybacking, but because I love the story and I wouldn't have ever read it. It's kind of like Ninth House. I wouldn't have read this had you not. And so therefore, so this was only, and I think it is important to say for this book, this was only, I think, my third read. This book is one of those that if it really is one of your jams and it is one of your comps, you will read this a lot to be able to really absorb all the goodness that's in it. And I think even as a reader, you would want to read it several times because it's just so layered. So with that said, what are some of the things that you want us to make sure we discuss when it comes to the plot? Also, if you can, make sure to touch on the fact that we're aiming not to have spoilers. So
Yeah. So I'll give you just sort of like my broad categories. And really, and this is based on what a writer can learn from this book. So right. This book is a masterwork for plot management. When I say plot management, I am talking about managing your story's primary plot and then the sort of subplots or other plot threads that extend off of it. So for example, Vin's training arc and the romantic subplot. Those are like two of the key sort of smaller plots that get nested inside of it. So this is a masterwork, and I really want to talk in depth about how he manages those plot threads. And I'll talk a little bit too about how that also then translates into individual scenes and why your global plot management and understanding these, like what your main story is really important down to the scene, right? The scene level of how you build scenes to make them all feel like they matter. So that's one big point with a lot of sub points under
yes.
it. And then the second one is talking about this as a first book in a trilogy. Now, we're going to talk about this both for plot and characters because being a first book in a trilogy, you have to think about it as a part of a whole. And we've talked about this before, but the first book in a trilogy is basically act one of the trilogy. And so the way that Mistborn really succeeds in being a first book and kind of closing its loops while leaving like the way that he closes the individual loops actually raises more questions that make us want to go into the second book. And that's a really, really huge facet of how you write a first book, particularly in a trilogy, rather than if you're doing like a serial style, which, you'll handle usually a little bit differently. So those are my two like mega points with their with their sub points underneath. What are the few things that you kind of want to touch on throughout this episode?
I felt like it's going to fold into what you're saying in that I'm just going to chime in. One of the things that I really like is the fact that you learn a lot, kind of when you talked about the plot management, but keeping your eyes on the fact that this is still an individual book. Yes, there's a discussion about it being the first book of a trilogy, but the fact that at the same time, this is a standalone book that must stand on its own legs. And the reality is that's a different discussion. It can sound like the same thing, but it's not. So there's that. Also keeping your eyes on the overarching arc, which is my other side of my coin of this, which is why I'm glad you're starting off with that, because there is a bigger story here. And it's like, he does such a great job of hinting at it and touching on it without really focusing on it. And I think there's something about, I love the fact that you say managing. I think it's something about understanding where you're going so that you don't have to you don't have to concern yourself with whether you reach your destination, which is why I love plotting. And this is like so like my jam. And so being able to carry that duality is so important. And I think what it helps you to do is to understand like what makes it to the page and why is it important. And when you understand the overarching, it really allows you to rest in that individual book's moment without sort of overheating as a writer, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. And another part, and I'm going to let you decide like when we talk about it, but I absolutely love that this book is rule-based, and those rules come in not just in the magic system, how the world works, you know, even down to the point of where their stations are, their social economic status, right? But those rules sort of allows you to understand what the lens is and how you operate on every level of the story, from the plot to the characters to the individual position of this book to the fact of the overarching world. And I like having that. And I think this is probably one of the things that I've always taken away from this story I don't know if I'm gonna say this right. I feel like this is like the plotter's dream. You can spend time just focusing on the rules, right? Yeah. And then once you get that, it sort of gives you almost like this checklist or this filter, if you will, for where we are in the process. And it's almost like you get a gold star for having your rules locked in. So it tells you what works and what doesn't work. But I think it can also make it harder, right?
Yeah.
And I think having those rules. And I think those are my two biggest things. I think the other thing, which is, I don't know, I'm just going to mention it, even if we don't get into it a lot. I think it is something really interesting. You know, actually, I think it'll go into to characters more. Something very interesting about how he uses the character relationships to navigate the plot. And so we'll talk about that more next episode, but I'm just mentioning it here mainly because with him, they are so tightly woven together that even trying to pull them apart seems like you're not going to be able to get away with not mentioning it. We just won't go into a lot of detail in this episode.
Yeah, because that's really like, that is also those characters. And the way that he did that is a function of the plot because it's a part of the training arc.
Exactly.
And so it's really, which again, it's just like that testament to how well it's all like weaved together so that you're like, well, I want to talk about this aspect of the plot, but I can't quite pull it out for characters, you know? Which is why I really do feel like this book is the plotter's dream. Because it's so tightly done. And so sort of meticulously crafted. And we'll talk about this in characters as well, but Brandon Sanderson, the work that he had to do to make this book what it is was pretty tremendous. So do we want to go ahead and start talking about plot management? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when we talk about plot management, and because I work with both historical fiction historical fiction by accident, but the rules apply, so I wind up in doing a bit of historical fiction, but also epic fantasy most especially. One of your biggest challenges is managing your plot. Because normally, if you've got a larger fantasy story, you are looking at, you've got your main plot, you probably have a character arc, and then you also have subplots, and so you've got all of this stuff going on in your story. And the trick is to be able to do it without any one plot or scene, like one plot thread or any scene, feeling tangential, because your reader's going to be in it for the long haul. So you have to keep them moving and make sure that they always feel a sense of progress, because they've got a long way to go to get from the start of your book to the finish of your book. And so you want to perpetuate that sense of, we are clearly moving forward, not stalling out or moving in circles where the story is sort of like going like, sorry for everybody who's listening and not watching, but moving in circles. I'm gesturing with my hand to make a circle. So the way that you do this, the key aspect to managing your plots is what I call sort of identifying the core plot of your story. And the way that you identify this is, first you get clear on your inciting incident. And from your inciting incident, you're asking, what is the story question that gets raised by this inciting incident? The answer to that question should become clear at the climax of your story in Act 4. Now, you guys know we love a 4-act structure around here, so that's how we do it. So for this story, right, our inciting incident is that Kelsier recruits Vin for a job to overthrow the Lord Ruler. The story question that gets raised is, will they succeed? And the climax is answered or the answer to that question that question is answered, there we go, in the climax of the story, which I'm not going to spoil for you and you will have to find out, but the climax of the story is very clear. When we are hitting that climactic moment, we know that we're there, and we're very clearly getting an answer to that question. And that forms the core or the spine of the story, right? This is at the heart of everything, what the story is about. Every other thread then builds sort of on or around this, right? They directly influence or are influenced by this central plot. So, for example, Vin's Mistborn training arc, right? This is complicated by the fact that we don't have a lot of time. We gotta overthrow the Lord Ruler, and so she has to do a lot of learning by doing. So while she's doing tasks related to overthrowing the Lord Ruler, she is also learning how to be a Mistborn. The romantic subplot is another huge one, because I don't think this is a spoiler. So the romantic subplot, right, is her and Ellen Venture. Ellen is cute, also a noble, also heir to the most powerful house in Luthadel, and maybe has some rebel sympathies, but we're not super sure. Right, and so this is a part of, we alluded to it in the summary, and even Brandon, when he talks about it, he sort of is like, it's got a little My Fair Lady aspect to it. So, right, she is brought into infiltrate noble houses, because all the other crew members are sort of like, they'd recognize us because we've done all kinds of shenanigans, because they're a lot older than Vin, they've been around longer, they've done a lot more stuff, and so they're like, basically any of us would get recognized, but Vin, you could come in as this young country bumpkin who's like, I've never been to Luthadel before, and then you can start spying and getting information on what's actually happening in the noble houses. In the context of it, so this is, right, directly contributing to plot to overthrow the Lord Ruler. And this gets directly complicated by the fact that she meets Ellen Venture, and he's hella cute. And she's like, I don't know, I really like this guy, but this is going to be a problem because he doesn't know who I am. Like, that I'm actually Ska and not noble. And also he's noble, so he may not be on my side, right? So as her relationship with Ellen develops, it is directly raising questions about whether or not this is going to derail their plan. And so the point of all of this is that it means that every single scene moves the story forward and clearly, so that even scenes that are sort of focused on some aspect of the subplot, we can clearly see how it's contributing to that core plot, so that every single scene we feel that we are moving forward, which again is essential when you're in a book of this sort of scale and this length. And so that's how I sort of like frame plot management and what it looks like in this story. That was a whole lot of words, so please go ahead.
It was, but I want to say this because if you go back and you're listening to this or you're watching this, I think it's important to know the way that Rachel unfolded it. That's happens in every story. It feels a little easier in like a romance because the romance is that core plot and we already know that, but having the story question be very clear to you and what that conflict is that they're up against, and then what the ultimate answer is to that question, which we get in the climax, happens in all stories. But here, the reason why or first of all, you should do it in every story. But here, why it's so important is what I like to call a twofer, right? It's the fact that you start having these scenes that cover multiple subplots that are moving things forward. So it's like you get a 2-for-1. But when you pull back, you still want to be able to see where those threads are because each one of those subplots must still stand on their own, even if they're a subplot. And so here, I think they fold in so well, but he does a great job of making sure that we sort of start. I don't know why my brain loves to say hopscotch, like you're sort of hopping through, moving sort of beat by beat, scene by scene, pulling us forward. And it's still getting to the point of like, for us, where is Vin going to be? What's going to be, what's what's the end state for this ragtag crew, what is her relationship going to be like when it comes to Kelsier and her, what I love kind of setting up like her, whether she trusts or does not the crew and team in which she's working with, because that all contributes to whether she can pull off her assignment when it comes to being a part of this crew. And so, yes, so I find, so the management, yes, you're thinking about the overarching, you're thinking about the management of the plot for this individual book so that it connects clearly to the rest of the trilogy. And you're also wanting to leave it in a state where we feel as though we know exactly where we are and there is a sense of satisfaction when we get to the end of this book.
Yes. Yeah, which that core plot I think also is essential to making this story a standalone.
Exactly.
Because, and in general, that's kind of the rule for trilogies. Book one has to stand completely on its own because you are still, like, you use book one, at least in my genres. I don't know, romance tends to, you see cliffhangers more often in romance than I feel like you do in other genres, because I feel like a lot of times fantasy readers will riot if you end a book on a cliffhanger.
There are cliffhangers, but the problem is there's a good way and a bad way, right? You normally want a cliffhanger that can connect to the overarching, but that the story for this book is closed. And I think sometimes writers mix those up. That's
okay. So in romance, the rule is actually the same. Of like, we have to close. Okay, perfect. So the rule for the first book in a trilogy is you have to close that loop.
Well, I wanted to make sure I would say rule loosely. I think that if you did it this way, you would have less issues.
Yes.
Right. So what you're saying is it means that people are along for the journey. You don't just drop off and they don't get some sense of satisfaction. And basically what you're doing, and a great example is when we read Sin and Chocolate, right? That story closed it off, but it gave us some, like, it left the door cracked. And it's like, do you want to keep going? And it's like, yes, we do. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's just sort of, we'll say generally best practice, right, is going to be to close those loops, because what you want to do is compel the reader to read the next book, like to raise enough questions that they want to read the next book without antagonizing those. So what you don't want is for your reader to feel like they got bait and switched, where they're like, oh, I'm reading, and then it's just like, whop, and it's over, and they're like, hey, that was rude of you, right? Because they spent all this time, especially when you're looking at a book that's this length, right? they spent all this time with your book only for you to not answer their question. And I would generally advise against that, because it tends to be more antagonistic than exciting to a reader, because now they're just like, how dare you? And even like I think about Ninth House and Hellbent, where both of these books, they fully close the loop of the main story, but they like, it's very clear what that next open loop is going to be. So you get the full satisfaction of the story that you just finished, but you already kind of know where that open loop is going to go. And it's the invitation to read the next book, and this is what we're going to explore. Mm-hmm. And so having that core plot and making sure that your climax is actually answering the question raised by the story allows you to fully close that. And then what Mistborn does so well is that the implications of the climax, of the answer to that question, are so interesting that they make you want to read the second book and be like, oh, right? Without feeling like, oh, they left an open loop and now I'm just like, well, not like, great, thanks for nothing, you know? And so that's what makes this so effective. And I think that's why your core plot is so key to implementing to sort of creating an effective first book in the trilogy, because it helps you to see, okay, here's the question I'm answering in this first book. I'll answer that question, and then ideally, again, the answer to that question is so the implications of that answer are so interesting that it drives us to want to continue reading in the series. But that core plot plays a really essential role in that first book of the trilogy being able to stand alone.
Y'all, this is very, I feel like this is, I like when people say a masterclass, but I would really like to say this is advanced, right? Because the reality is that this is why I think sometimes, like, you want to do a trilogy when you got some sort of like skills underneath your belt, because what you're already doing is you're taking something and you're multiplying it times 3, right? Mm-hmm. And I also think that it's helpful, even if you take what we're saying right now at a very high level, even if you're not a plotter, and just sort of understanding like what am I aiming for these high level questions, and what are the answers, so that it can help you understand like what are your bookends when it comes to this particular story and how we spill over. And I like to think about it, when you think about that at the end of that story, and yes, you close out and there's a resolution, but that the answer then opens up a whole nother can of worms, right? And sometimes it can be self-interesting. Sometimes it can be, you can already see the bigger problem that this positions, even though we have an answer. And a lot of times, if you're in the romantic capacity, it's the fact that maybe there is a relationship there, but it's not where they really want it to be, or there's still tension and friction, and that's not what we have here. But I think that's how you can see those same sort of principles at play in a different world. And so I would say having those baseline questions, even if you're not a plotter, can be really great as guiding posts and to guide you through the process, because all of those strings, if you will, you guys can't see me if you're listening, so just, have a bunch of threads that are running parallel that sort of merge into one, lead you into your climax, and then sort of ends, and then it sort of opens up a whole new world going into another book. And I think this book does it so well, and it's so entertaining that you can almost miss the fact that this is a very complicated plot.
Yeah. And one thing I want to say really quick too, because we're getting into the nitty gritty of Mistborn and how Brandon Sanderson did it. But if you're listening to this, this is something you work out over multiple drafts.
Yes.
So because one of the things I noticed, and this is so common, right? Like in a first draft, you're sort of like, each thread gets one scene, and you're like, okay, well, in this scene we're going to do this thing, in this scene we're going to do this thing. But then as you iterate on it, it becomes easier to say, oh, I can actually combine these. So these things are actually like happening at the same time. They don't need to be separated out into individual scenes necessarily. And you begin to be able to like weave them together and even also identify potentially what that core story thread is. You may go into it thinking it's about one thing, and then by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh, actually, like this is the core of my story. And so the point is that, you know, we're talking about a finished work here. Brandon Sanderson wrote a number of drafts to achieve this result. And so if you know that your story is going to be a trilogy, it is a good idea to kind of like project out and say, okay, what is the realm of book one, knowing sort of like where the whole thing is headed so that you have some guidelines for yourself, but understanding that you will finesse this over multiple drafts. So if you haven't even written your first draft yet, like slow down. Like, you know, and so like just get through the first draft and see what you're working with, and then you can fine tune these aspects across, you know, 2 and 3 draft. Again, I walk my students through about three very intentional drafts, so that those are the numbers that I have in my head. But the point being, like, this is something that you have to iterate on in your story to make this function in the way that we see it in Mistborn. And so if your first draft doesn't look like Mistborn, Brandon Sanderson's first draft of Mistborn didn't look like Mistborn either. So just understanding where to position this conversation in your process, and you know, not asking questions of your story that it simply is not ready to answer, you know?
Mm-hmm. I will say that I've seen it different ways. I have seen it where a first draft can come really close to it, but it also means that that person is probably a very heavy plotter, right? I know, like, I can remember clearly with a client where we were doing something that was like a trilogy, and we worked on that plot for months. And that was only after working on the series, if you will, for several months before even getting to the book one. So I think what I would say is, yes, that's true, but I would also say you have to know how you work, and you also have to know like how a lot of those real pivotal moments come to you, because sometimes the real moments don't come to you until you start seeing it on the page and you get to know those characters and you see some of those scenes. I think sometimes the layering of it for me comes early, but how to heighten it and how to get the most from those moments come with iteration. So I would say that would be like knowing how you work, but the expectation is not that it'll be like a one hit it and quit it, you know, like one time. But, you know, people work differently. I just would say extend grace and allow yourself to work through it. But I would also say, like, having the ability to have, whether it's a discovery draft or giving yourself plenty of time with the plotting, because I'm a person where my plots are like a first draft. So me saying, oh, well, I do, you know, a draft or a fewer drafts, but that's because I spend a lot of time plotting. But it's also because I know how I work and how I write. And I think a lot of that, I'm really curious, and I'm sure you probably know, of like when he wrote this book, where he was in his career as a writer, because I think that informs a lot of it too, right? Also, what can inform it is whether you're doing it in isolation or whether you're working with somebody, because you are borrowing that person's skill set. So they can see things that you wouldn't ever see if it's one of your earlier books. And so that informs it as well. But I think the biggest part of this is understanding that you're sort of operating at both the pie level and the slice level simultaneously. And in asking yourself to see both of those perspectives at one time, I think that would be a total disservice to the book and also to the ultimate journey that you want your readers to go on. But I think reading something like this and giving yourself an opportunity to say something like me, I'm an annotator. Okay, this scene, like, what were the plots that I see being touched upon? You know, was it all 5 of these, or was it just these 3? Was it these 2? And allowing yourself to chew on the fact that each one of your chapters or each one of your scenes are going to ebb and flow with that, but it all leads you down that same like yellow brick road, if you will, to get to that destination. And he does it really well. And you could totally see how this book could have been 10 times longer.
Yeah.
It's tight. Man, this thing is tight. And so it makes for a very fun read, and it makes for a great reread.
Yeah, yeah. But I think I just want to like highlight what you're saying here. If like, you know, if you're trying to do something like this, give it the time that it needs, whether that's in the plotting. If you are heavy duty plotter and that's how you work, then you are giving yourself the time in the plot, right? Like giving yourself enough time in the plot. If you know, just like Dana said, that you need to kind of get into the story a little bit and discover around and look around, give yourself the space to do that, while knowing that like that's gonna be more of a discovery draft, and then you'll be able to translate those insights into your next draft. But you just want to give it the space based on how you work. Give yourself enough time to actually do whatever it is that you need to do, whether that's, you know, again, plotting up front or a lot of iterative drafting. So Brandon Sanderson, he talks about this in his lectures. I believe, I might get the number wrong, but I believe he auditioned 4 protagonists for the story. So he wrote this story with 4 different protagonists before he locked into Vin of like, this is the right protagonist. I was going to talk about it in characters, but it's just, again, that iterative process. And this was, so he had written, I believe, 14 books, like 14 complete books that he had submitted for publication. He had only just gotten his first book accepted, Elantris, which was his debut. So this was his second book, like sort of as a published author. So it just kind of tells you the amount of experience that he had racked up by the time he was writing this book. I'm not saying you have to write 14 books before you can write a book like this. The point is that he gave the story the time that it needed to develop in the way that he wanted it to. And for him, that included doing multiple drafts and just getting in there and seeing what happens when this is the main character. And that can just sort of also help you set fair expectations for yourself, so that you're not like, oh, how did I not write Mistborn in a month? Like, that's okay. Brandon Sanderson didn't write Mistborn in a month, so I think you're good. So I like to always kind of give that counterbalance of sometimes we put this crazy pressure on ourselves to produce something in a time frame that the professionals didn't take to produce it. And so expecting ourselves to do it in half the time might not be fair to ourselves or to our process.
Yeah, and then I want you to have time to move to the next point. I think the other part about that too is the fact that, you know, having a clear understanding of what this book represents for the series, but for the trilogy, but also what does this trilogy represent for you, the writer, right? And that can mean something different depending on where you are. Is it your first time? If this is a time that you really want to explore magic systems, is this the time that you really want to explore a more intricate world building, right? And having an understanding, it sort of gives you a really great container. Yeah. So you're not trying to do all the things all the time, because that can feel that way here because it's so layered. But I think giving yourself permission to be where you are, but also take inspiration from something like this, it just makes you feel excited and like make you want to step it up.
Yeah, and it helps, it's just your point, it helps focus your attention. So you're not like, oh, I'm going to do everything. It's like, oh, I really want to explore this thing. Then you can focus in on that particular thing. Exactly.
So that helps us with like plot management. You also wanted us to discuss, I had rules, but I know that's not what you said. What was the second point that you wanted us to discuss?
So we already hit the first book in a trilogy, right? The way that you handle the first book in a trilogy. So then we're sort of like dovetailing into where I think we have a couple of your points that I think mesh together pretty nicely, which is sort of book 1 and the overarching arc of the story. because that actually connects into structuring the rules for the world and the magic. So do you want to kind of just lead off that part of what you wanted to talk about?
I don't have a. I think again, y'all, was only my third time reading this book, and this was the first time that I felt like I really loved how the knowing what the rules were for the world and the magic informed everything. I feel like it was almost like bumpers or guardrails, if you will, for the storytelling in general. And to me, it was like, oh, like what, how could you use that in another capacity? Like we talk about it a lot for magic systems, but having this for a group of ops, or having this if you have a morally gray, like covert unit, that they still have a set of rules in which they operate. And then what happens in your story is you begin to see if you can poke holes. Yeah. Or what happens when that is tested. And here it didn't just affect the magic, if you will. It affected the individuals. It affected like everything. And so I think to me, it informed like the way that the characters acted. It informed the tension and the conflict. It informed why stuff failed, and what happens. And I think what I've seen in the past is that either there were no hard and fast rules, or you allow your protagonist to be an exception to every rule. And it's like, wait, because then us as the reader, we don't get the opportunity to sort of lean in, and we don't get to hold on to what we believe to be true about those rules when you just change them to suit the outcome that you want. And so I felt like this reading was so great, right? Because it created these constraints. And so I'd love to hear you talk about it, but I think from a sense of the editor and the writer in me, it's like, do you know what those constraints are? And how are those constraints being tested and poked at? And why do you want to test and poke at those constraints? Because here, those constraints being agitated informed us about Vin and Kelsier and like what was going on in this world. And I think it makes for a really great layup for books 2 and 3 if you're doing it in an informed way. So I would love to hear you talk more about it. But I feel like this is another layer of the way that he designed it. But I also feel like it can be helpful and also could be frustrating, and you sort of have to figure out like where you fall in that spectrum as a writer and how clear you are so that you can use them in your favor.
Yeah, and I really do. So this comes back to sort of the hard and soft magic system, right? Which we talked about for the first time with Ninth House, because Ninth House is much more of a soft magic system. It's very mysterious. We don't actually know the rules. And the benefit of that is that it can provide a lot of mystery around the magic, and a lot of unpredictability. But the downside of that is that it can be easy to cheat on purpose or by mistake, right? Where it's like, oh, good thing blah, 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 this works because we don't know what the rules are, so we can do whatever we want. And so the benefit is that it feels magical, right? It feels like magic because we're like, ooh, we don't know what all it could do. But the downside, again, being that you can make exceptions because there's no rules to hold yourself to. And so that requires a very specific approach to make sure that you're not doing that. On the flip side, this is like classic hard magic system, and I do sort of feel like Brandon Sanderson really popularized the hard magic system, which is our magic systems that have hard and fast rules that are very clear constraints. This is how it works. These are the parameters in which it works. Period. Full stop. And again, the benefit is that you have strong parameters that you can work within, but also then attempt to innovate within to say, okay, if this is how it works, right? And you'll watch Brandon do this in this book and then double in the following books, where it's sort of like, if these are the constraints, what are the creative solutions inside of these constraints? And then you get really satisfying scenes where you're like, oh, like it abides by the rules, but it's such a creative solution that it's like so satisfying to experience. With the, and then again, and Brandon talks about this when he talks about magic systems, is that, you know, the trade-off is that sometimes it doesn't feel as much like magic, because it's like, you know, it's like physics. It has rules and this is how it works, and that's all there is to it. And so you just have to understand where you fall on that spectrum. But this is a fabulous example of a hard magic system, because he has established clear, direct rules that we all know, or that we know to a certain extent in the first book, and then the world continues to expand over the course of following books without ever breaking the rules. It's our understanding of the world expands, but he sticks to those hard and fast rules so that we, again, because he's never cheating. And so this is a really, really good example of that and how you do that. And I think that he does it so well because he uses the plot to demonstrate the magic, right? We do get these moments of explanation, but he doesn't explain how the magic works until we've seen it first. In the very beginning, we watch Kelsier use the magic a little bit. He uses a little bit of allomancy. And so, like, I think within, like, the prologue, it's like Kelsier burned tin. He could see more clearly this thing, but then this thing burned, had a huge glare in his eyes. So we understand immediately that, okay, this enhances his senses. And then we'll get, another thing that he uses and another thing that he uses, so that we've seen him using the magic on multiple occasions. And we even see Vin a little bit use it, even though she doesn't know that she's using it, so that when Kelsier sits down to explain it to her, and we get this sort of moment of this, you sort of get like just this fairly short chunk of dialogue where he explains to her the basics of allomancy. As the reader, we're still a little out of our depth, because we're still unacquainted, but we've seen the magic in action enough that when he explains it, we're like, oh, okay. We don't fully understand, and we're going to learn more about it as we see Vin train, but we have enough of a foundation because we've seen it. And so it means that when we're getting, like, he's giving us answers to questions that we actually have versus, like, here's a dump of information, but we have no excitement about the magic. We don't know what it does, and we haven't seen how cool it is, so we kind of don't care. We're like, okay, I guess that's something you could do, maybe. Like, but then so he really uses the plot to showcase the magic through the conflicts and through letting us see the protagonists use their magic to overcome plot hurdles, and building that understanding for us over time, so that by the time we get to the end of the story and it's like Vin burned tin, we're like, boom, we know what that does. Vin, steel pushed, and we're like, cool, I know what that means. And we're that well sort of integrated with our understanding of the world building and of the magic has been integrated enough that we understand it. So that's really a kind of a masterclass in how you handle, in particular, a hard magic system that has those strong rules. But any magic kind of functions that way, as you showcase the world building through the plot and the obstacles that the characters are overcoming.
She summarized that as if it was just so simple. But the thing that I want to, the final thing that I want to say about this, like, I get what you're saying on the hard and the soft magic. I also, as someone who doesn't write fantasy, okay, y'all, I do some shapeshifters. That's it. Like, we could change the rules every time. Okay. But what I like is the fact that making those decisions, allowing those decisions to be made and to permeate everything is helpful as a writer, right? Like, you've given yourself the time to think through, what does this mean? Okay, I'm going to use metals. This is what happens when you use this metal or that metal or whatever. But I think it's also something very interesting to think about it from the capacity of, like, what is my promise to my readers when they pick up a story from me? And is this what they're expecting? Are they expecting that it's a hard, they're not going to say, I want a hard magic system, right? Yeah. But is that who you are appealing to with your story? And if so, like, where have you sort of done that work and sort of done that thought process? Because here, knowing that, it really informs the plot. It informs the plot, and when we talk about characters, it informs the characters and how the characters grow and develop. And I think, to me, that's where I found the rules so helpful. My fascination as a reader is not from the magic, because that's not a thing that fascinates me, but seeing how having the presence of that affects the part that I do really like, of like, well, then how does she change? How she thinks it's just luck. And she realizes that she has a very limited capacity of what this means, and how she even personally tried to manage it, and why, as she moves into the story, having a Kelsier in this crew is so important for her to get to where she needs to be in this trilogy. Right?
Yeah.
So this is how all of it comes together. So here, I love, though, that when you dedicated time and you really got clear about the way that that magic system shows up and how that affects the world, and how that affects both the social economic standing, where they are, and how it affects each one of the protagonists in this story, that it then sort of shapes and informs everything else, all of your other decisions. And so, to me, I love when that happens. It means you have to sit in it and allow yourself to really chew on it and digest it. But once you know, then you'll know why a scene is working or a scene isn't working, or how to heighten the scene, or how do I need this to escalate, and why, and where are we going on this road. And I think giving yourself the ability to do this, so in creating it as a constraint, I think can be helpful, especially if it's your first time. If you give yourself the wiggle room and the time to begin to iron out, okay, well, what does this mean?
Yeah.
What are the conflicts that are here? What is it going to cost them if they try to do this? What could they win if they do it or don't do it? Like, begin to sort of probe at this thing. And I think what will happen is you have this overflow of opportunities, so that when you're going back through your scene list and your chapters, you can use that to help you. And so seeing it that way, to me, it almost took something that can be, it could be really complicated in execution, simplified, if you can say it that way, right? It's simplified. And when I saw that, I was like, I really liked that, right? So, like, what are the pros and the cons? How can they be punished by doing this? How can they be rewarded? What does that look like? Are there ways to get around it? Is there secrets or whatever? Like, having those sort of conversations with yourself and with your plot, or with that list, begins to be almost like your action list.
Yeah.
Or how you're going to come into it, or even the place where you begin to ask yourself questions, right? Again, I know I'm a plotter, and some people, they are pantsers. And if you're a pantser, it may be that once you go through that draft and you understand that, then you can begin to sort of create this sort of list, or these rules that you've sort of initiated through your discovery writing, but then turn it into something that is more concrete if you're going for the hard, right, versus soft. But we don't ever want to be wishy-washy, right? So that you understand, how that lands. So with that said, are there any other things, because we could say a million things about this story, but we don't have that time. Is there any other things that sort of rise to the surface that you find is really important to think about as someone, wanting to write something that is similar or adjacent to something like Mistborn, that you would want to point out to that writer?
Yeah, so the last thing, I just want to highlight something that you already said, and just sort of re-emphasize it. A lot of times for fantasy writers, when the idea comes to them, there's some aspect of the world that they're really excited about. There's something that's sort of like, oh, this would be cool. And I think that what you're saying about spending time with that particular thing, whatever that thing is that, inspired the story, or the thing that's got you the most excited about the story, you can do this with plot stuff, you can do it with character stuff, but I'm thinking specifically of world building. But yeah, you could do this with any of your stuff, like any of your categories of things. But taking the time to actually okay, sit with that thing for a while and like map out the like, okay, but what would this mean for the world? Like follow a cause and effect chain, right? And be like, if this is true, what does that mean about governance? Or what does that mean about how the economics work? Or what does this mean about the kinds of people that will exist in this society? Or, right, and you're taking that thing that gets you the most excited and spending enough time with it to kind of find the trickle down of what it really means, so that what's happening is you are building out your world, but you're also building it off of the thing that the story for you is like, that's kind of causing the story to bloom in the first place. And that's how you know, I mean, the in Mistborn, you have a whole set of soldiers, right, who don't wear metal on their body so they can fight Mistborn. Because if you got Mistborn running around, you can't have metal on your body that they can pull and yank you around or take off of you. There's also this whole sort of set of economics for how it works with the metals and the rarest metals, and why this is the one that like is sort of the main one of the main currencies for the nobility. And so you're taking that key thing and then you're working it out and saying, ooh, what does this mean? And you're kind of like almost like combing out like all of the things that you can kind of pull out of that thing. And I think it can help you generate ideas. Then you can start to ask yourself, depending on the type of plot that you're working with, okay, how does this affect my plot? Right? So if you're not writing an action story, you may be framing it around something different. If you're, you know, so you're thinking about what does this mean for my plot and my promises, and how this sort of trickles then into those things as well. And so it can help you build out that story around the thing that excites you the most, and it gives you some momentum to sort of build up and build out as well. So I think that idea of spending enough time with something to really see what does this mean can generate a lot of really, really good ideas and really help you begin to shape that story in the direction that you want it to go.
As you were doing this, if you all are listening and not watching on YouTube, what are you doing with your life? But
we do a lot of hand gestures. You may find them very useful.
And it makes me think about your love of a good mind map, and like I always call a whirly-bird map. But I think this is a great place for us to put a pin in. I think that's absolutely true. I think allowing yourself the time to do that will also give you a lot of meat and fodder for the rest of your trilogy. And I find that as a writer, like I've done this part over years before I'm actually writing. And when I go back to those notes, it's like hitting gold, right? Because you're able to go back and you didn't even realize that you've answered some of those questions because you've taken really great notes. And I think that's what makes us so excited about reading a story like this and writing a story like this. So with that said, y'all, I think this is a wrap for us talking about plot with Mistborn. If you did not already realize, you should have this on your TBR, because there's so much more and we can't cover everything. But I think we've covered enough to, one, wet your whistle, but to also make you super curious about what he does here and how that can help you become a better writer. And so we will see you in our next episode as we talk about characters. We've already teased it, because again, it's so hard to extract one from the other in this world, which means he's just an outstanding storyteller. So we'll see you as we talk about characters in next week's episode. If you have not done so already, visit us online at storydeepdive.com. You can find out more about our past episodes. You can also subscribe. And if you are watching us on YouTube, don't forget to thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Y'all, we will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for being with us. And as always, happy writing. Goodbye.